Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about Bolivia and tombs excavated there dating to 500 years ago. So this is a really interesting article because one, it has to do with the Incan Empire and the Incan Empire when they were almost at the height of their power. And two, there are people with elongated heads here. That are found. And if you guys don't know, elongated heads there are people now who live now in Africa with these heads, as you can see these photos here. Also, it seems like the details of their coexistence, the Incans and this group of people that they had taken over from the Aymara kingdom, the Pacaje people, it seems like they coexisted almost pretty seamlessly. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll get into that in a second, but let's talk about first how they found this cemetery. So they found this cemetery carved into the limestone of this Bolivian quarry, and it contains the remains of about 100 people. There was another article I read that said there are 118 people. This article says there's 100 individuals, but either way, there's a lot of people, and it gives a lot of insight into not only the interactions of these people, but also the stage of the Incan Empire itself, where they were at the time. And so the remains were about 20 kilometers away from La Paz, which is the capital of Bolivia. They found these 100 individuals were buried with more than 30 vessels. So the 30 vessels were Incan. That's how they knew this had to do with the Incan Empire, because this was the same vessel they used in other death rites from other excavation sites that they found. The people with the elongated skulls, though, they must have been nobility or something, because not only do they know that because of their heads, but also what they were buried with. So they were buried with a bunch of different jewelry, like horseshoe-shaped headbands, brooches, necklaces, bracelets, all of this stuff that were not typical of Incan society, but rather they were more of their own personal cultural tastes. So this tells us at least two things. One, the Incans did not completely dominate their society. They did not go in and destroy their idols and kill whoever did not accept Incan way of life. Rather, it seemed more of a mutually understood, you guys can, if you guys are absorbed into our empire, we'll let you retain your way of life. You guys can do whatever you want, as long as you follow Incan law. That's what it seems to be, more of an absorption rather than a bloody takeover. Now, I don't know the exact details between the Aymaran kingdom, and which developed in the year 1200 in the Andean highlands, and the Incan Empire, who seemed to be in full, like I said, they were at the height of their powers at this time. This archaeologist, Julio Condori, who runs the Archaeological and Anthropological Research Center in Tiwanaku, he wasn't involved in the excavation, but he followed it closely, and he says the finding reaffirms our identity and culture and shows that not only was there an influence from the Incas, but from other people as well. So it seems like all these group of people who were mingling within the Incan Empire in Bolivia at this time, they kind of lived in, they were able to speak freely for the most part. They were able to exchange ideas, goods, services. It seemed like they were allowed to bury their dead in a way that reflected their cultural values, except for the vessels, right? The vessels were probably since they were Incan, that means that the Incans had some say in how they buried their dead. But either way, it seems like there was some mutual respect going on at the time. So here's one of the pottery they found in. And by the way, when they found the cemetery, it was in pretty bad shape. Not only was it looted before they got there, But a lot of stuff had deteriorated beyond reproach. Like, they couldn't figure out what was what. Although they did get lucky and find those bodies and those elongated skulls and stuff like that. But as far as their material goods, a lot of it rotted away just because, it's humid. There was all air passing through. There was all kinds of erosion going on, and within a few centuries, a lot of stuff just disappeared. Because 500 years ago is not that long ago, so they're lucky that they even got like some pottery like this and those bracelets and stuff. Which I think, where's that photo? Well, here's the elongated head here that he has in his hand. I think there's another photo. Yeah, right here. These are really, really deteriorated and nothing like they would have looked in its heyday. The tombs are interesting because they held the remains of men and women from different social strata. Again, like I said earlier, it seems like they weren't too much of they didn't really have a caste system. They didn't, like India does. It seemed like people, not egalitarian, but there wasn't much emphasis put on separating classes of people, according to this article here. And the elongated skull thing is really interesting, like I said, because they were practicing it in another continent thousands of years before allegedly they found these skulls. But there are people still practicing it today. So how did that tradition that's maintained to this day in Africa and in Egypt, Akhenaten, like I think I mentioned earlier, Akhenaten, who's either the father or grandfather of Tutankhamun, he had an elongated head, and he was thought to have been really smart and this divine being. So it doesn't. I mean, it does make sense that the nobility and the higher ranking people, so to speak, in the society had elongated heads. But I know there are going to be people out there who think they're either ancient aliens or extraterrestrials who aren't Homo sapiens, but rather some sort of humanoid human being in the human family who just happen to have these heads for whatever reason. And I've heard the arguments like they say the people in Africa who you see here, their heads, although elongated, are more cone-like, and their skulls wouldn't look like this. But then I don't know. There's this one which looks like this one. So I don't know. It seems like this was a cultural practice, so I don't think they're from the moon or anything like that. But I have heard those arguments, and who knows? They don't really know. I don't really know. But as far as I can tell, it's just a cultural practice that somehow got picked up. I don't know how they would come to that conclusion to do that. Maybe, I don't know, people wear fedoras now, and maybe it's just one of those things, a fashionable thing and nothing more. Or maybe they thought it did give you some sort of mental edge, or maybe it kind of it's kind of like changing your antenna, or maybe they believe that they could tap into some sort of knowledge, some cosmic knowledge or something like that. Whatever superstition it was, they were doing it, and they were doing it in two seemingly remote places, South America and Africa. Now, the elongated head thing is not the only parallel between the two continents. If you guys look at the Olmec heads, some scientists think that because those heads look like a more Nubian, they have a more African features than the people living in South America now. They think that at one point in time, those two, the African population and they somehow either came on boats, or their culture somehow influenced people in South America at some point in time. Whether that's true or not, I really don't know. I don't think there's any smoking gun evidence for that. We could get closer to the truth if they do sequence these people's DNA and sort of elucidate that the picture of the peopling of the Americas better by adding these people's DNA to the mix and see where they trace from. More than likely, they may trace from the people who came in from Beringia, but who knows? We never know, right? I mean, these people had elongated heads. That's huge, right? And remember, 500 years ago is not that long ago, so the fact that people were doing that practice 500 years ago, and then Akhenaten was doing that thousands of years earlier. Who knows how long they've adopted these practices? So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you guys are an Incan history buff, an Incan scholar, let me know exactly the context of what was going on during that time. Who were the Amaran kingdoms? Was there a huge war fought between the Incans and the Amarans, or was it more of a less violent takeover? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.